Hold on.
This could be a disaster. I apologise if it is. It's okay.
I get seasonal asthma. You gotta hold it in your seconds. I laugh. Hello and welcome to the Croggon Conversation Hour. Maybe not actually an hour. I am Joshua Croggon.
And I am Zoe Croggon.
And together we are the only Croggon sibling duo employed at a bookshop, being the Sun Bookshop in Yarraville. And we're going to talk about two books today. They are...
Ken Haruf's Our Souls at Night.
You have to pronounce that properly or else it sounds quite rude. And David Grossman's A Horse Walks into a Bar. And basically we'll be discussing the books in depth. We're talking about plot, narrative and more interesting things. If you don't want to know what happens,
Don't listen.
Yeah, stop listening. If you do want to know what happens,
Keep listening.
And if you just want to listen, then do.
All right.
All right, so we're starting off with Our Souls at Night by Ken Haruf.
Yes. So this book was pretty universally loved at the bookshop and seems to be kind of generally well regarded. It's kind of come into the limelight in the past, year, because they've made a Netflix feature film about it, which we will be discussing later on. Josh, thoughts on Our Souls at Night?
Well, I think it's most famous, I guess, because it says on the front cover, a masterful final novel. And a friend of mine mistook that for just thinking the reviewer was like hoping that it was the final novel. That this it was such a negative review, being like, this is a masterful final novel by this author, but obviously he died.
It was his last novel.
It was his last novel. He was aware that he was dying and he wrote it in that. It's set in a town called...
It's set in the fictional Colorado town of Holt.
In which all of his novels are set, I'm pretty sure. We haven't read his other novels. But Plainsong is definitely set in the same town, but I'm fairly certain all of them are, and this is within the same context. So it's quite important to know it's fictional. And basically the story is... very simple. It's that Addie Moore goes to Lewis Waters' house and asks him... Do you have the actual sentence?
Yes. And then there was the day when Addie Moore made a call on Lewis Waters. It was an evening in May just before full dark. And so that's kind of the opening sentence where Addie basically proposes to Lewis or Louis?
I've always said Lewis. There's something about Louis that makes it... Wait a minute, whatever you want it to be.
L-O-U-I-S I feel is...
Louis.
Louis?
Louis?
I think it's Louis.
It's Louis.
It's Louis.
Well, I was
yeah,
wrong.
Lewis is L-E-W-I-S, right?
Well, the cat agrees with
feature
you,
from
so
the
it
cat.
has been determined by the cat.
Where were we?
So she propositions him with...
She doesn't proposition him.
Well, she does. It's like
Well, she kind of does.
she has a proposition for him, and the proposition
Yes.
is that she is lonely at night and she wants to share a bed with him. Do nothing sexual. That's not necessarily.
It's not out of the question.
No, but it's not
Just not a
what her question. But
condition.
she's lonely. She wants to have someone to talk to and share a bed with because they're both. What is a male widow? What's the?
A widow?
Is this widow?
Widower.
A widower. Oh, they got the alternative version in that one. And then that's how it begins, and so it just follows them, and most of their conversations holding hands at night in bed together.
So there's that very strong focus of kind of getting through the night.
Yeah.
And this idea of kind of, the loss of romantic love later in life being kind of meaning that that's also the loss of kind of any intimate life or any close life you have, especially in the evening.
Yeah. No, but that's right. And it's because it's such a Holt is this small town, it also talks about the politics of being... Actually, it's very aware of ageism. So this idea that because they're old, they shouldn't be doing anything... Because the whole town thinks that everybody watches everybody. And there are some very, very funny scenes where they have this old woman, Ruth, who they occasionally... Addie takes her out shopping and does things with her, and they go to the supermarket and they go to the checkout chicken, and the woman says something very derogatory, like really snarkily implies, that, Addie needs more sleep or something like that. And Ruth just completely destroys her and just says, you do what you want, don't worry about what anyone else says. So it's really about how you're seen, especially as someone who's 70, having what is perceived, because they do end up sleeping together, but originally it is completely not sexual, it's just company. and then that turns. It's really about that, but also about, it's such a novel about history, because all the things they talk so honestly about their past. It's really, and often the chapters, not even chapters are they? It's just it ends and moves on to the next part. Often begin midway through a sentence, and it's really quite a beautiful way.
Yeah, it's written so beautifully, and that's kind of the attraction. Is it's like his writing is so spare and it's so pure. It feels like it's distilled to this kind of absurd level of purity. And it's like 179 pages, and it just kind of shoots through you, and it's quite, I think, deceptive in its simplicity as well.
Well, as Ursula Le Guin, I think she's quoted as saying, if there was one word out of place, it would fail.
Yeah, exactly.
And it would be like this horribly sentimental thing, which it just isn't.
Sorry. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's maybe where kind of the film comes in. Actually, neither of us have seen the film, but we have seen the trailer.
We watched the trailer for the film, which was enough to make us not watch the film. And a woman we work with saw the film. She watched the whole thing somehow and hated it. And I really trust her. But the film basically just seems to, because I reread the book before we did the podcast, and it was funny reading it, and I sort of was really aware of the film because it was made after my first reading. And having awareness, if you put music under this conversation, it would be awful. And the thing of reading it, when you read it, Addie Moore is like such an incredible woman. You kind of fall completely in love with her. She's just really, really genuinely doesn't care what anyone else thinks. And Louis is the more tricky one. He's kind of really conscious and sort of working around it. And there's an amazing scene where he says something really snarky and the whole conversation changes. And she says, you could ruin this. It's when he attacks her for sleeping with a boy. Her first time she had sex, it was kind of embarrassing, and she got pregnant, I think. I can't really remember, but it's this incredibly complex. Like, it's very complex and it works very gently, and you don't need anything more. There's no quotation marks throughout. Like, when people talk, it's not noted, and what that does is make you read slowly, and so you really.
But also you don't have the kind of that interruption of punctuation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it does kind of flow. It's kind of like a fable in a way. It's like a parable, the whole story. And I think what you were saying about it being, in a way addressing a kind of ageism is interesting, because it kind of operates on the presumption that when people are retired or if they're widowed, they shouldn't kind of hope for anything more, or they shouldn't have ambitions in terms of romantic relationships because that's deemed as kind of inappropriate or it's pathetic or something.
Or just like there's an idea that it should be wrong. I mean, whether that's a reality or not is also a completely different thing, but the judgment you feel. But so the film then looks very...
Well, it seems like, because the book operates on this knife edge, because it is incredibly, it's an optimistic, I think it's an optimistic book at heart, and it's extremely romantic, and it's very earnest. It kind of works against cynicism and against doubt and against negativity. So it's like the second you put that into a film, it would be so easy for it to kind of just collapse into sentimentality. And I think perhaps that's there.
Having not seen it, but I think it does. I think that even the way Addie Moore...
Heaven Allows?
No.
Sorry, I've got the hiccups.
Yep.
It actually reminded me a little bit of All That Heaven Allows.
Who's that? What's his name?
Douglas Sirk.
Douglas Sirk. I've seen...
Yeah. So...
is that the woman and the man in the woods? And
Rock Hudson. And I can't remember the female actress's name, but...
it's incredible. It's full of lush colour. And
yeah, it's a very...
He's the gardener or something, and he's lower class? Or is that the other film by him that I'm thinking of?
I don't know what you're thinking of. But the reason it reminded me of it is... Well, so also, Josh, you would be familiar with the plot because Fassbinder's Fear Eats the Soul was inspired by All That Heaven Allows. This quite like an older film by Douglas Sirk that's about an older woman pursuing a relationship with a younger man, and the kind of ageism that she encounters. It felt quite similar, in a way, to Our Souls at Night.
Yes, but the thing, even watching the trailer for this film and just saying, "Hey, Addie Moore, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we share a bed?" And you're like, oh God, what have you done?
I know, it's horrible.
And honestly, I mean, I was thinking about this, we kind of got onto this just in talking about it. One of the criticisms you could level at the book is that it's very white. It's very
it's a
privileged.
It's a very kind of myopic focus of kind of small town America that is white, that is comfortable, that is bourgeois.
Yep.
These people, they own their own houses and they're financially comfortable and they live kind of very simple, generally, even if it's not emotionally peaceful, but like generally peaceful lives.
Yeah. And, that's a very fair criticism, but the novel in of itself, outside of that, is still just exquisite. But also it's interesting, simple is I think the right term, because I think Ken Haruf really, really pushes the idea of simplicity through food. I was in the rereader, because he talks about when Ruth has them over for dinner and she, has canned beans and like a supermarket cake or something like that, and it's all this very simple food. And there's this amazing part of the novel where they go camping.
That's a
it's beautiful. It's like takes you outside of the town, suddenly they're in this exquisite, which I'm sure is real, and I'm sure Ken Haruf loves it, part, and it's just very beautiful. And there's a particular, he basically gives you a recipe of how to make sloppy joes, and it's like the mincemeat and the ketchup and
that's right.
and you really want to eat it, but it's very specifically not indulgent. And I think the book really, not the film, the book, I finished reading it and I was really, this is really true. Felt much more content, because it doesn't make you want anything more.
It kind of it strips away, I think, excess, and it kind of anything unnecessary, and it feels like it boils down to these kind of totally fundamental and potential simplicity of living and what is required for that. Yeah. And the kind of also the inherent beauty in the kind of quotidian and in the domestic and in these kind of simple gestures of, whether it be making sloppy joes or having someone to talk to at night. It's like, I think Ken Haruf's writing has that power to do that.
Well, exactly that simplicity, because there's a lot of paragraphs where it's just, and then this, and like movements of what they did, and then, they mowed the lawn, and then they walked down the street, and then they took the dog for a walk, and yeah, it's just...
Yes. I was trying to think of a way to kind of tie it in with the second book we're going to talk about, A Horse Walks into a Bar by David Grossman.
Well, as an alternative, I think, because I think Our Souls at Night is so distilled, and also it's one of those books you read it and the first time I read it, you'd suddenly cry and you don't know why. There's this incredible scene where Addie's grandson, her son Gene, is in financial trouble. He and his partner are basically breaking up, and he just begs her to take care of the grandson. Mm. And so she ends up having him, and he's got abandonment issues because, his mother's left, his dad's are suddenly gone, and he's staying at her house, and she goes, I'm just going to go out of the room and go to the bathroom and I'll be back. And she goes to the bathroom and he's just at the door because he doesn't believe she won't return. And it's just, like, just started crying. And I was thinking about, like, it's like he's very gently filling something with water, and then all of a sudden it overflows, but you don't know when that happened or how he did it.
Yeah, because the novel structurally is working up towards that moment, and it kind of sneaks up on you.
Yeah, and then suddenly you're like, whoa, what'd you do? He knows what he did. But
which is, I suppose what A Horse Walks into a Bar and Our Souls at Night.
Nice.
Sorry.
Nice.
have in common is this kind of, I think, a real structural strength.
But I was going to say, by comparison, A Horse Walks into a Bar is just like, as you said, compulsive as far as how it...
Consult my notes.
Because, it's much like, say, Our Souls at Night is very still. Everything about A Horse Walks into a Bar is just kind of hectic.
Yeah.
It's just, you start off, you're
like
in a crowded club in Israel.
Yeah.
And
yeah, we should describe what it's about, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll leave that to you.
Well, it's set over probably 2 hours in a comedy club in Netanya in Israel.
Netanya. He hates them.
And it's a stand-up comedian, Duvale Greenstein. He's kind of teetering between hilarity and hysteria, and he's performing a kind of piece, basically, and you get the impression that he hasn't performed this exact kind of piece before.
Well, there's that moment, because he starts off and, the audience is there, and also comedy just as a format is already...
I think comedy always has that kind of potential for tragedy. Yeah. And it's all, in this instance, it is sinister.
But it's funny, our father talks about comedy being the hardest job in the world, trying to stand up in front of an audience, and make them laugh. Most terrifying. Like, you can be Bob Dylan and not be very good anymore and play the songs. Everyone's like, he's a genius, that's incredible, and the song's good. But you can't go in front of an audience and sell a joke and it won't land, and it'll just be awful.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that stress just gets worse and worse through the novel. But there's this moment at the start where he's just going on, you're like seeing it through this narrator you don't really know, and there's this moment where he slaps his head. He does something wrong, and Duvale slaps his head and
he speaks ill of his parents. Is that right? Yeah,
I don't really remember, but he slaps it so hard that his glasses have been out of shape, and it's just that moment.
Yeah, and I think he's bleeding and his glasses break or something.
That's later. I think.
I'll find it.
I mean, it could be from... But also, what's he wearing? He's wearing cowboy boots. He's
and suspenders, I think.
And he's really, really pale and very thin, which you find out, of course, he's dying from cancer.
From cancer?
Isn't that the presumption? He has,
well, you kind of...
prostate cancer?
Yeah,
he makes a joke about it.
Yeah,
and then the narrator... What's his name?
His name is Avishai Lazar.
That's
who's
right,
a
Lazar.
childhood friend who he's requested that Lazar comes to his show his request is like to tell me what you see.
Absolutely, truthfully. And they were only friends for a short period. They both went to the same maths class.
Yeah, the same maths tutor, that's right.
Yeah. And they were really charmed by each other. Like, Lazar was completely charmed by him. He thought he was this very beautiful boy. And it gets to this point, very, very interesting. There's this camp they all went on. I can't remember the name of it. That's the thing. The whole thing is working towards that, basically. And then this scene happens where they're on this camp, and Lazar is he's been watching him and just sort of watching the audience, and it's really fascinating. And then suddenly he's like, oh, he's going to expose me? He's brought me here to expose me, because it turns out he betrayed him. And the betrayal is actually nothing. In a way, it's everything, but it's such as, he didn't do anything. It's what he didn't do. It's a very, very small thing, which meant the weight of it is incredible. It's when he was crying in his tent. Lazar was crying in his tent.
Yeah, because... No.
Greenstein came in, because he uncontrollably started crying, and then Greenstein came in and looked at him like he could help him or needed something from him, because he's been bullied. Everyone's putting salt in his soup. He's eating it like a clown.
Greenstein's mercilessly bullied.
Yeah, awfully bullied. It's terrible. And then that all culminates in that car scene. The car, where it feels like it literally goes on forever. It's just he's just in this car.
So just to describe it to the audience,
the Jeep.
Yeah. So whilst he's at this camp, during kind of a drill, Greenstein is summoned by one of the sergeants and taken home in this kind of massive Jeep, under the presumption that he has to attend a funeral, but nobody's actually told him what's happened. And throughout the course of kind of, in this Jeep, it's this bizarre situation with this kind of young soldier who is incessantly tells him these kind of grotesque jokes, which is an interesting mirror to what Greenstein's actually doing, as a way of kind of easing pain. And I think we'll get back to that later. But he does what he calls an accounting. Yeah. And this is kind of what he's most ashamed of in his character, is that he's trying to figure out which of his parents has died, and he's trying to basically decide whether it will be his mother or his father. And he thinks that decision actually impacts the reality of it, and that's something that he has never forgiven himself for, and he's like clearly traumatized by.
Because his mother was a Holocaust survivor, and basically couldn't leave the house, and his father had all these like schemes. He bought all these really discounted jeans, and then all the zips are broken or something, and they just sat
and
in
his
the
father's
room.
abusive,
very abusive,
and his mother's like clearly quite depressed, and he talks about never being able to unsee the cuts on her
but
wrist.
Also he constantly tried to make her laugh.
Well, I was going to bring this up again, because talking about kind of the redemptive or kind of the healing power of comedy, or of laughing, or of the act of laughing, or the act of trying to make somebody laugh.
Well, it's funny because Fallez? Well, I've forgotten the name.
Lazar.
Fallez. What the hell is that?
Fallez.
Terrible attempt. Lazar is, because he obviously has, his own history is that, his wife passed away, presumably, and he's been very alone and shut himself off, and he's a district judge. Yeah. Something like that. He corrects.
High Court judge,
yeah. He corrects Goldstein at one point. Greenstein, but he's constantly watching the audience, because he's confounded by why they're there. He's confounded by why they're there, because he doesn't understand what they're watching, and people have come back to see the ballet again, and he doesn't understand what they're getting from it this next time. And I felt like the context of the book was brilliant. For me, like, the thing I kept coming back to when I was reading it was actually, I feel like Grossman was making a really interesting point about the redemptive, like, look at the catharsis of even just communicating stuff you can't tell people. Obviously.
Well, so, you may know this, but his son was killed by Hezbollah in Lebanon.
That's right.
I think David Grossman's son in 2006. And I'm reading Mayhem at the moment by Sigrid Rousing, and she actually quotes David Grossman, which is the last book I read, so it was a kind of nice kind of coincidence. She quotes him saying that, I think the ability to put words to emotion is what makes us human. And so it talks about writing as a kind of format of making sense of the world or creating a form for, your emotion or your pain or your grieving or, etc. And I think, you talk about the redemptive power of comedy, and it's like that's actually a theme throughout the entire book. We talk about him trying to make his mother laugh.
Yep.
We talk about kind of, that knife point of comedy and of tragedy, and it's interesting.
It's very cruel though, because he's constantly pushing the audience. He makes them chant anti-Arab things, and his jokes are the ones that the audience enjoy the most are the most sexist. It's constant. He's like, the comedy is actually quite horrific.
Well, he's a reasonably grotesque character. Like,
he is
totally appalling. And I guess what I found really interesting about this book as well is that Lazar's character is kind of, he's sitting all the way at the back and constantly, almost compulsively assessing the way the audience is reading it. He's seeing it from this kind of almost anthropological sense. But structurally, it's really interesting because he's, at the same time as Lazar is kind of watching Dovaler and commenting on, the performer to audience sort of dynamic. There's an interesting mirror going on where it's also reflective of the reader.
Exactly.
Dynamic,
exactly that. That's
which is fascinating. And it's like, it sounds weird to talk about writing, I suppose, is like, technically precise or to have that precision or a craft. Like, I don't usually talk about things like that. But for this book, it's like, it feels to me like it is perfectly crafted. And I think that Grossman and Haruf have that in common in terms of both of these books. It feels like these real, kind of these burnished gems from a lifetime of writing.
I think the mirror is really interesting, because that's what I was wanting to say before, was that, like, Dovaler, he needs to say this thing. And, he's dying and he hasn't obviously never spoken about his childhood and things that happened to him, but that mirror of the audience. But I feel like it's such a discussion about, if you're writing it, it has to be entertaining or else people aren't interested. You can't just write, my mother
like
killed herself and I thought it was my dad, and, and everyone's, so who's going to want to...
It feels like he has contempt for the comedic elements as well. It's like...
Grossman?
No, Dovaler.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because he is constantly trying to kind of sustain the audience as well, as well as sustain himself. And by doing that, he has to kind of insert his performance with these kind of reasonably grotesque kind of punctuations of comedy or of humor or of mocking, Palestinians or Arabs or something. Like, there's always something quite off about it. And actually, when I was thinking about this book and after I'd read it, because I really, really loved it, I looked it up on Goodreads and everybody hates this book.
What?
Everybody.
But it won the
hates
International Man Book Award.
Yes. Everyone hates this book. It has like all-round 1-star rating.
What?
And it made me think about it. And the reviews are appalling. Most people are kind of saying, I cannot believe, David Grossman is such an incredible author because he's so revered. He's like one of Israel's, quote unquote, greatest writers. And I think, I don't know. I'm not trying to correct anybody, but perhaps
but they're
mistake,
wrong.
But they're clearly wrong.
Well,
But like, I wonder if it's the error of kind of reading the content without understanding the subtext. That, of there being something deeper and saying, well, a lot of the comments were, this is grotesque, it's not funny, which is of course the point.
Yeah.
How can Grossman think that this is, literature, or is this a way to write? This is a horrible book, like it's a really nasty piece of work.
Oh, so they're the kind of people, they're the kind of
but
people.
But it was like 5 pages.
But the thing is, people they have this, not some people, let's contextualize Some people. They read the book and are like, this is exactly who the writer is, and this is what they think.
Yeah, it's mistaking the character for the writer as well. I think that's an error.
But I think Grossman never falls in. I don't think at any point you can believe. I think he's, like everything about all of, the xenophobia, all the stuff in there, it's really critical. It's it's horrible watching it. And also the fact that people kind of get swept up in it is really interesting, confusing and confounding.
Yeah, it kind of operates like a parable in an interesting way, because it's like, I think the audience, represent the disgusting public, in a large way.
Just
him, I think at one point he makes them chant death. He makes them chant about death? Like
he makes them all start,
hooray for death.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's almost becomes, a parody. But sometimes, even though Dovaler's character and Lazar's character, they're very solid characters, it does feel symbolic of a people or a nation in total malfunction, like, operating kind of horrifically and things going horrifically wrong. Because Dovaler's story is so desperately heartbreaking.
It's awful. And it's quite genuinely.
And the humour in that operates as not necessarily a respite from the tragedy, but almost as a forewarning. I think the comedy, Because I don't think Grossman is saying that comedy is kind of, you know, the opiate of the masses.
No.
But I think he's talking about it as something that is necessary as a way of dealing with things. Clearly,
but also
his character deals with his life by making jokes about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, comedy has that ability, like good comedy has the ability, you can almost talk about anything. And you can probably talk about anything if you know what you're doing and do it well. And it makes it accessible, and that can be cathartic. And but also comedy is often but what's revealing about it is you can be at the top of something and make it funny, and then what's underneath that top is just like everything else, and that's part of why it works. So there's the, you know, I can't think of an example, obviously, but I think the darkness of comedy, which is always particularly apparent in this, but that's what often makes it funny, is how close it is to, you know, there's suicide jokes that I think can be funny, and it's really shocking that they can be funny, but the reason if they work is that there's an absolute understanding and actually revealing of that stuff. It's actually being discussed, and often that stuff isn't discussed elsewhere with quite as much insight or like honesty, which is really interesting. I think Grossman gets that. I don't think he is. Yeah,
it operates, I think, on a very fine edge. You know, in each instance, like, you know, the book could collapse. I mean, it's the same as what we were saying about Ken Haruf. These, you know, as a kind of concept, it's quite interesting. Actually, over the weekend, I saw a play for the Melbourne Festival called Two Jews Walk Into a Theatre, which is Brian Lipson and Gideon Oberzanek, who a choreographer and an actor. And the premise of the play is it's kind of has the traditional stand-up setup. So we have a red velvet curtain, and in front of it we have two chairs that are spotlit, and they're each playing their own fathers, waiting to see a performance by their sons, Brian Lipson and Gideon Oberzanek. Anyway, I thought there were some kind of interesting parallels in terms of, you know, this kind of classical method of using comedy to talk about tragedy, but also, you know, it made me think about Jewish identity as well, because they have an enormous kind of erupting argument about Israel and Palestine in this. And I think that also, I think that Grossman's work operates on that edge as well, of this, that like you are either one or you are the other, and that is kind of the identifying element of being Jewish in contemporary society.
Maybe. I think that also is an idea of what is leveled as an idea as well, like that you are defined by this thing, but also that you are not at all, but the idea that you're defined by it is problematic and you can't help thinking about it. I think I just want to talk, the only problem I had with the book was that woman, like
the little woman.
No, I love the little woman. There's this moment in the book where this woman, Dovella, talks about being a child and he hated his childhood, and she says, "No, you were a beautiful child."
She's a woman in the audience.
Yeah, and
she's totally appalled by his kind of tawdry, offensive, insulting jokes. She's totally horrified. I mean, and she recognizes him from her childhood, and she's appalled by this kind of grotesque figure in front of her, and what happens throughout the course of the book, and the way that she kind of returns to him and he returns to her, because he doesn't recognize her at first, and then he's really thrown off and embarrassed by her presence, because she's a sincere presence in the book, and she's saying, "No, you're a good boy. Why are you doing this?"
But it's awful, because what reveals is the perception she had of him is just not what he was. He was beaten by his father. His mother was suicidal. She never left the house. She just saw him as this boy who was famous for walking on his hands. He learned how to do that because that way you didn't get beaten up. People didn't know where to punch you, is what he says basically. But no, basically it's just Avishai Lazar, his wife has passed. He's been very alone and he's confused to be there. And then this woman gives him a look, and then when she leaves, she gives him his phone number. And I hated that part. It's totally inessential. This is pointless. It's like, and then he was saved by this woman, and there's something good came out of the night. I was like, I don't need this.
I know what you mean. I think maybe that was kind of
this is personal. This is just me. I'm just being annoyed by it. But
you're allowed to be annoyed by it.
I am very annoyed by it. I don't understand.
It didn't really annoy me a lot. I mean, it felt like, you know, I mean, maybe if we're talking about catharsis, also like Lazar's pain of having lost, you know, this woman who he was desperately in love with. It's like, you know, as much as Greenstein, the Double's character, is reconciling his trauma, so is Lazar. And so perhaps for him that's part of a redemption, is it may not come to anything, but I mean, I understand.
Does it have to be through a woman, you know, like, and then the woman...
Of course it does.
It has to be. The woman came along and she made the effort and he wasn't going to do it, but she helped him out, and, you know, things are maybe looking good. One thing...
Yeah, I know what you mean.
It just annoyed. It just didn't sit... For me, that's the only moment that I was like, Nothing else made me question anything.
Yeah, it is. It's
Which is
actually kind of a
the whole audience
surprising
chanting
move.
death. I was like, this is incredible, but I can
Yeah.
absolutely. If you've seen a performance, people do get caught up in this energy, and I think Grossman really understands that energy of like this mass, like. I mean, it's led along by this mass, by this one person.
Yeah,
who can
because it's
control
actually kind
you.
of, you think about the book and it's kind of incredible because like 99% of this book is dialogue and it has, it's compulsively readable. It doesn't have chapters, I don't think.
No, it doesn't.
No.
It just goes.
And
It goes.
it's incredibly difficult to put down because it feels like it barely has paragraphs. Like it never loosens its grip. It reminded me of reading Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante, which does have chapters, but I found that book, like I love Elena Ferrante and I actually love that book, but I found it unbearable because it never loosened its grip on you and it just kept rolling forward. And it was generally unpleasant. Like I was so anxious when I was reading that book.
But I mean, there were moments, but the only reason it would stop is because a memory comes back in and they constantly revive.
I mean, it's punctuated by different, parts.
That's when you'd be like, I can get a glass of water.
Yeah, exactly. I can put it down and go to bed.
What was I going to say?
You hated the part with the woman.
Look, it just stuck out. I know what I did want to say. The moment when you finally, I think the memory comes up. You just hear him. So you see him when he finally gets to the funeral, and he was really hoping it's his mother who hasn't died and his father has, and he's decided, but he doesn't know, and no one told him. And he sees his father runs up to him. Everyone's crying. He's gone to the funeral home, and and then he sees his father, and his father looks at him. And he runs up, and his father recognizes in him that he didn't know, and that he thought it was his mother. No, he hoped it was his mother who had survived. And that moment really reminded me of Per Pedersen. It was a very specifically young boy and a father relationship, especially one that's abusive and incredibly complicated. But that moment was really. Because that's where the novel culminates to, really, because that's what you want to know. After it's really quite strange because the fact you really feel like you're in this audience.
Yeah.
Watch all the energy that sweeps them actually sweeps you. But that moment was kind of completely incredible and terrible.
I didn't really read it that way.
Oh, see, I thought it was just awful.
And
it really reminded me of Per Pedersen, how he does
it-
that to you, how he just goes, there's these things you don't understand and these looks you can give that explain everything.
Because I saw his father's face as being because he's convinced, Dauvelaire's character is convinced that because he goes through this process of what he calls accounting when he's in the Jeep on his way to the funeral, coming home from the camp, and in his mind, his mind kind of almost beyond his control decides that his father must live.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so his mind makes that decision, but he doesn't really want it. And he's like, oh my God, I've had this thought and what will I do? And of course it's my fault that my father has lived and my mother has died. And I think that it's him. He talks about being in the Jeep and everyone on the street looking at him from inside the car and they're like, how do they know that I've made this horrible decision?
Yeah.
How do they all know? I don't think his father recognizes that. His father comes up to him and saying his name and he's crying and he can't handle it, and he runs away on his hands. Cause
that's right.
Yeah. It's horribly. He runs. He doesn't come back for 2 days because he can't bear the pain of it.
Because he's constantly trying to remember his mother and he keeps remembering his father without failing it.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that. But I thought his perception of it was that his father knew.
Yeah, he thinks that his father knew what he did, which was to decide that his mother would die.
Oh, it's much worse
he talks
that way.
about saying, at that moment when he sees his father at the funeral, I could have killed him. I'm so powerful. Anything I think comes true.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's much worse.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're getting time symbols from our sound engineer Ben Keene, who is also our brother.
He wrote the theme song. He's also bought all the recording equipment, so he's in front of what's called the Dead Cat.
Dead Cat?
Yep, I'm in front of a very professional looking microphone.
That is not the Dead Cat.
Then another Dead Cat.
Thanks, Josh.
Well, thanks, Zoe. It's been a delight.
Yeah, it's been a total delight. I hope that made sense too.
Can't wait to talk to you outside of the context of this podcast and have an argument.
That'd be great.